Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. So I thought stories are the best way to communicate, and I'm going to start by sharing a quick story. It's called a toothpaste story. I love ideas which are about things that are part of our everyday. So this is the recommended amount, but how many of us actually use this, or how many of us use more? We all do more, right? Because this is what the advertisements show us. They show us toothpaste like a dessert, like multiple layers and toppings, and you must consume it in this delicious way. Um, so where does all of this come from? Yeah. So many years ago, decades ago, there was this guy. He came up with an idea and which he thought was very brilliant. So he went to an organization and he pitched his idea. And his promise was that it will take you almost no cost in the implementation, but you will get a 40% increase in business. Now 40% is huge. It completely changes the market holding. It completely changes your consumer retention. It changes everything. The profit is completely different. And they took his idea and they basically bought the idea and they gave him a lot of money for that. And he was rich and happy. It was something that would support the idea of using these advertisements. So it was actually backed on a behavioral insights bit, but at the same time, a very solid product idea. So he basically said that the amount of the toothpaste should be increased by just a tiny which is hardly anything. What that does is that the bigger amount means more product comes on your brushes, right? And so you will run out of toothpaste more, so you will go to the store and buy it more. And if every single person is doing that, that just bumps up the revenue, the market price, and the sale to 40 or more percent. So it was this very small idea, and his idea wasn't just about a change in a product. It was really about thinking of human psychology. It was about the consumer. It was about also the placement of the product, which eyelet should be placed. So a lot of different kind of angles. So the reason why I wanted to share this story as part of the design thinking, it's more of a doing. It's not just about thinking. It's more of an action thing. It's a very doing bit. And design is, we'll cover this later, but what it helps us to do and why we must think of design in other domains as well is because it changes the way that we approach things, and everything is a mind game. Everything is about how you think, how you perceive, how you take decisions, how you actually advocate for something, how you ideate, how you prototype. So it really allows you to think differently and think of what you're not thinking of. So what do you see on the screen? It's not an error. This is not really a blank slide, but it's actually trying to say the area of influence that we have. But what happens is that we're not able to see the area of influence or the space of impact or what we should do or what we need to do unless we draw some kind of parameters around it, unless we bring a focus to this is what we want to do. For example, our idea wants to support environment. It wants to reduce the carbon footprint, for example, or pollution, or it wants to perpetuate or promote ideas of responsible consumership. So we have to draw some kind of a parameter around what we're trying to do. But even within that, this small circle is the space of obvious that we often try to explore, and we're not able to think of a lot of other aspects that have a very strong impact on what we're trying to do, whether that's business or ideation or theory of change or impact or whichever sector we work in. So I basically work in the development sector. and I head the innovation portfolio at UNDP Pakistan. What that means is that I have to change, or I have to try to push for the sector to change the way that we're working, because we're focused on a very small space. But what we need to also do is explore the space of unobvious. That is actually what allows us to deconstruct problems and go towards problem behind the problem, right? If we look at the plastic pollution, for example, what we normally say is that सड़क के ऊपर या side के ऊपर, there's a lot of plastic bags, there's a lot of trash. But when we want to solve that problem, we will have to investigate the entire journey of the plastic, the entire system, from the consumer to the producer to how it's used. Why is there some plastic that you never see on the road? Why do you hoard plastic containers even after being used? Because they're better quality, they can be reused. And then a lot of the plastic material, a lot of trash actually gets picked from the road. Our informal sector picks it, but there's still some that's left. So why is that? Is that the plastic grade? Is that the quality? Is that the lack of utilization? What is the behavior behind it? What is the economy behind it? So it's only when we start thinking about other things, and design thinking and design practices actually allow us to do that. So this is called really the space of unobvious. And what it helps us is to investigate the culture of innovation, the service economy, and really the business value of design, because it's not just something that we think for good pitches, but it actually has a very, very strong revenue-based result if and when done smartly. So what is design thinking? But so design really is a process, and this is an approach that you saw for problem solving, and it is facilitated by design thinking. So there's a very strong difference between design and design thinking, and I feel that it's very important to make that distinction also, because design is a lot of the times associated with aesthetics and superficial elements, but there is a problem-solving approach that basically supports that. So the difference between design or a conventional linear process and design thinking is that design can be more about individuals. What that means is not only can it be for an individual, but it's also an idea that is coming from an individualistic mind. But when you apply design thinking to it, it is all about collaboration, different stakeholders, getting different perspectives. And it is not so much about the product, but it is more about the experience that you get. So the very, very common example that you always hear when people try to discuss design thinking or experience economy is coffee shop. Why would you choose to go to one coffee shop versus the other? It's not about the coffee that you drink. It's about the experience, the space, the service, the experience, how they communicate with you. What are you served? Where do you sit? What is the light? What is the sensory experience? So that is actually something that makes you decide on certain things. And while design can often be, a successful design can only just be limited to engineering and tech or people, but design thinking is all about putting the human in the center. So what does that mean, to put the humor in the center, right? It means that we're now talking about a creative process that really is honed to finding meaningful solutions. And it applies cognitive thinking, so a lot of psychology, behavioral insights, and it's really packaged as a process through an empathetic and user-centered approach. So what does that look like? How do we break down design thinking into different components? So it's basically 5 major steps, and they are not in a linear fashion. They're very iterative. You go back and forth into it. So a very core component is empathy. What is empathy? Empathy is believing and thinking and living somebody else's experiences and thinking as our own. So not only are you just being empathetic or just trying to be relatable, but you actually try to live it. You try to understand them, their decisions, their context, their influences, their conformities. And then the second stage is where you're trying to define the problem that you're trying to solve. This could be your hypothesis statement. This could be your statement of intent. It could be the problem area. So for example, you could say that how might we use behavioral insight to change the way people react and respond to pollution or plastic or digitization or really anything at all, right? Or a motorcycle or remote control. Whatever you're trying to solve through design thinking, whether that's your business idea or product idea, that is what you use to really define what the problem is. And then another stage, which is very important, is ideate. So this is a stage where you don't think of the one solution, but you really just push yourself to generate a lot of ideas. You can call it brainstorming, you can call it research, you can call it anything, but this is a stage where you're trying to come up with as many responses to what you have just defined for the person who you've gained empathy of, right? So empathy is your user, define as your problem, and ideate is how you want to respond to it, right? And then a key sort of rule in the design process is test early and often and fail early and often. So what that does is that it encourages you to prototype. So in business, you can call it a soft launch. Instead of really sitting on an idea for years and then you feel ready and then you launch it, you do very, very soft launches. You do user testing to kind of see how people react and respond to what you're doing. If you're doing apps, for example, it could be a paper prototype that you test with people. If you're doing a product, you can do testing for products. If it's a policy, you can again do policy experiments. So really, this is to support you in creating and testing as many times as you can. And then, of course, you're getting feedback. Feedback helps you in improving. And so that's why it's also a very iterative process. Feedback actually can allow you to be more understanding of the user. So again, it adds to the empathy, it adds to you defining and ideating better, improving your prototype. So I kind of wanted to stress on three things a little bit more. So whatever your idea is, and I'm told that you have a lot of really exciting ideas, think of that idea and put down on a piece of paper the person you're trying to solve the problem for. Just come up with one persona that your idea is going to cater to. And then come up with, and after you have that person, come up with an idea that you think will solve that. And that is perhaps the idea that you've already pitched. Think deeply on how you would develop the idea. Is it an app? Is it an actual product? Is it a service? Is it a conversation? So what is that prototype? What can it potentially look like? Whether it's the farmer or a curious child, then you start to also understand them. What influences them? Why are they interested? What is the utility for them? And then you start sharing your idea with other people, and you start bringing in technology or business or tools or whatever the thing. So what it does is that it sharpens, and every time you get feedback, you're able to define what you do better, right? So empathy, for example, it comes from listening. In this case, you will go to the curious child or the farmer, and you wouldn't just talk to them about your idea, but you would really try to listen with your eyes as much as with your ears, right? So you try to see how they sit, how they stand, what do they eat, what upsets them, what are their responsibilities, what are their problems, what are the barriers of their thinking as well as of their actions, how do other people look to them? And that allows you to think and how you influence. So think of marketing, think of ads, they're all catered to very, very specific target market. And that's what you have to do with your products also. You ask a lot of questions and you listen with a lot of patience. And you kind of understand the person, because it gives you confidence that what you're working on is actually a meaningful problem, and it stops you from forcing your solution or perspective onto somebody else. So what you do for this case is you develop personas. And there's a lot of material, you can look up how to do it, but I think that this is a single most necessary step. When you don't understand the person and you don't give it that persona, which has solid goals, needs, circumstances, limitations, influences, distractions, you're not able to move forward, and you're not able to get a product market fit. You're not able to get a solid business model canvas if you don't understand all of these things from a people perspective. So again, something to think on and something to work on. So we're going to now go through a few examples, right, which are of ideas where designers actually sympathized and understood the user, not just the user, but the situation. So a lot of the time, the situation is also interesting to analyze. What is the current situation of farmers? What are the current policies, landscape, environment, climate change, vulnerabilities? And then you, a lot of the times, can come up with a solution which can be so different from what you initially conceived because you're being open. So in this case, the designer came up with, so basically there were a lot of accidents that were happening on road of cyclists because they didn't have proper lanes. And even when there were proper lanes, the turning points, there was just a lot of friction between different modes of traffic. So they came up with this way of doing the signal, how, you know, you have in your cars indicator, if you want to go to left, if you want to go to right, and how the light lights up in the back when your foot is on the brake and you're about to take the brake or reduce the speed. So they created these bags that they could wear, and there was a chip and an indicator that was connected with the functions of the bike, and you could do indications. And it was also something that was LED, so it would work at night as well. So just, I'm going to browse through examples to help you see some examples where the context was given a lot of importance, and from a user perspective. So we all know a Braille, right? How did the Braille actually translate into other things to make, to be more inclusive, right? This is something we see on our phones, the feature phones, something we see on ATM machines. So how newer products are coming from it. So people started making brands in which there was a tag label, and the size and the color and the details can also be read through Braille. And we don't have that in our stores, right? So we're not including them in that process. Measuring tapes or medical tools. And now there's a lot of work being done on how to create sensory experiences on a non-touch screen for them to be able to communicate through smart technologies. Then we saw a lot of innovation in 3D for products, but how is this being also used for real problem solving? You know, like creating medical or prosthetic, you know, solutions for people. Then this is my favorite example of a person who actually used the coffee sleeves as a way to communicate. I also saw examples where people had their resumes printed on this. And so everyone has your resume, everyone sees you're looking for work. Just really, really low cost, smart ways to kind of get your message through. The sweet spot of design practice, something that I do, and I see a lot of value in it. I think that design thinking is great, but it sometimes limits us. So the sweet spot of design thinking comes when you're also bringing in systems engineering and a little bit of strategic foresight. So systems engineering is something that focuses on how different things interact. So what is a system? A system is really multiple components and how they interact with each other. What is the dependency? So say your watch has a lot of different pieces, and if one stops working, the others have an impact. So that's what everything is, a system. Our relationships are a system. Our office dynamics are a system. Our utilities are a system. So really, like, and I initially gave you the example of the plastic pollution. So that's also system, right? And foresight is when you start thinking of not just right now, but of future. I'm not going to talk so much about foresight because we won't be able to cover it, but it's also something that will help you have businesses that would sustain, that are not just for today or the current realities, but that can actually stand the test of changing trends, the changing complexities. It will help you do speculative design. It will help you be more future ready. So pandemic, for example, it feels like it came out of nowhere, but there are think tanks that were talking about and speculating on these things from years ago. There's now a lot of speculative and strategic foresight work done around climate change, which we see. But because it's not adapted into our regular practices, we miss out on things. And why you want to do systems work? Because it's non-linear. What I mean by linear is also something that we say in Punjabi, JP lagana. Koi choti si bhi problem hui hai, just quick fix, and that's it. You don't think of long term. But systems thinking really allows you to put the problem in the middle, think about it from long term. So if you put the curious child or the interest in astronomy or astrology or whatever, then you start off thinking of benefit of that, utility of that, access to that, information around it. And you start to really look at it from industry perspective, policy perspective, utility perspective. And I also wanted to, so this is an example of my work that I did and I got hated for a lot because it's annoying. The ringtones that you started hearing during COVID, right? So COVID के टाइम पे the first thing that anybody would say was कि ओ मैं WhatsApp कर दूं या फिर आप Facebook पे डाल दें. But you have to understand that there's still 4 billion people who are not connected. So they may not be using, and we're talking also about Pakistan, they may not be using internet, so they'll miss out on that information. Then you say कि अच्छा newspaper में दे देते हैं, but again there's a percentage that does not read newspapers. Then you say कि अच्छा radio में कर लेते हैं. Radio is also not everywhere. We feel that it's everywhere, but when you do data sets, you see that even radio and TV has a limitation of access. But what we found out was that 90 plus people in Pakistan have access to phone, not smartphone, feature phone, but they have access to phone. तो फिर you can think about कि अच्छा उनको message कर देते हैं. Not everybody reads messages. Not everybody has literacy, or not everybody reads it. But when you call, so it was a way to force information, right? When you call someone and there's a ringtone, so that ringtone is actually giving you a message. So it wasn't just to say, oh, COVID ho gaya and it's scary, but it was also a message backed with behavioral insight. It was drafted by thinking what can be positive impact. It was to empower you. So A, it was telling you what it was, that we have a pandemic. B, it was telling you that you can do something about it. Third, it was telling you what you can do. And fourth, it was encouraging you to do that by putting your loved ones in a vulnerable place. It had to be a short message. It had to be like, what if somebody picks up the phone after 10 seconds? It costed nothing because at that time, everyone was operating in an emergency response. So the PTCL and all the telecoms were very, very quick and supportive to adapt it. And later when we did the survey, we found out that it had a lot of impact. So 43% people more likely to, stay home or wear mask after hearing the message, and that 71% after hearing the ringtone were more likely to correctly identify the symptoms of the virus. So again, thinking of this is something you can prototype, a lot of these things. So very, very quickly about the foresight bit that I talked about, how do you speculate using design thinking? Let me just quickly focus on what the business case of design is. So a lot of the times when we go to our teams or investors and we say that we're using design practice, design is still somehow looked at as an add-on or something superficial. So you really have to make a case for it. And the toothpaste story really helps with that. But another thing to look at it as that what we know now and how we operate right now is really the current state. But if we want to be long-term, if we want to be non-linear, if we want to ensure that our businesses last, if we want to think about companies that have stayed in the business longer. What was that company that used to make cameras and camera films? And they're no longer in practice because they didn't adapt to change. They remained true to what they wanted to do, and so they didn't adapt, or so we no longer see them. So these kind of thinking and understanding of trends and really being flexible and adaptive and consulting the user again and again and their needs actually allows you to bridge the gap between what your strategic role can be and where you're now, and that gap actually supports in a very, very increased business. In our local context and also in a lot of other contexts, not singling out Pakistan, is that we do a lot of reactive work, right? Suddenly floods have happened. Now everybody wants to work on that. Suddenly there's a trend and everybody wants to react to it. But what we don't do is take time, reflect, and see before pressure comes, what is something that we can do, right? It was designed many, many, many years in advance. So it was ready to be disseminated. Somebody thought that it would emerge as a need. You have to do that. You have to do that kind of thinking with your business. Where exactly would you be in the space of transformation? Because the world is transforming. Time isn't waiting. Circumstances aren't waiting. Would you remain just at the periphery, or would you try to seep in, or would you actually go in the middle and really change it from a broad spectrum kind of a way? So yeah, I think I'll just end here.